Good afternoon from Jakarta, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Welcome to the virtual workshop on expanding solar, wind, and ocean energy as part of the Indonesia G20 Presidency 2022. This conference is in collaboration between the Ministry, Energy and Mineral Resources of Republic of Indonesia and the International Renewable Energy Agency. It is a great honor for me, Claudia Lenke, to be the MC for today's event. Allow me to first greet our guest for today, Mr. Yudo Dwinanda Priyadi, Chair of the Energy Transition Working Group, G20 Indonesia 2022, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources Indonesia, the representative of Ministry of New and Renewable Energy of the Government of India, Troika G20 2022, Mr. Dr. Prahoro Nur Cahyo, Co-Chair of the Energy Transition Working Group G20 Indonesia 2022, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources Indonesia, Mr. Dadan Kusdiana, Director General of New Renewable Energy and Energy Conservation, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources Indonesia, Mr. Dolph Gillen, Director, IRENA Innovation and Technology Center, International Renewable Energy Agency, and all panelists, distinguished development partners, and participants. Ladies and gentlemen, we are gathered here for the workshop on the future of energy globally. This event will draw from IRENA's work both globally and in the Asean region, as well as other activities of partners in the region, to explore ways in which G20 and ASEAN countries can support each other in rapidly expanding renewable energy and driving down emissions consistent with net zero around mid-century. It will highlight the key technologies that will be needed to accelerate the energy transformation with a special focus on solar, wind, and ocean energy, and provide insights into how these technologies can transform the energy system in Southeast Asia. In addition, the conference will discuss how innovation can help bring down technology costs and the role of the G20 must play in this area. The roundtable will also discuss developments and issues affecting the energy sector related to current crisis and the larger topic of the geopolitics of energy and supply security. It is in this spirit we are meeting today in this event, virtual workshop on expanding solar, wind, and ocean energy. Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to invite Mr. Yudo Dwinanda Priyadi, Chair of Energy Transition Working Group, G20 Indonesia 2022, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources Indonesia, to give his opening remarks.
All the speakers and participants, greeting to you all. Good afternoon from Jakarta. I am Yudo Dwinanda Priyadi, Chair of Energy Transition Working Group ETWG, is pleased to welcome you all at the second webinar of the ETWG webinar series. This webinar addresses highly ambitious tagline, which is expanding solar, wind, and ocean energy solutions. Before highlighting those three renewable energy solutions, let me briefly explain the Indonesian presidency main profile in Energy Transition Forum. G20 Indonesian presidency addresses the main theme of recover together, recover stronger. The presidency has set three pillars, namely global health architecture, digital economic transformation, and sustainable energy transition. The pillar of sustainable energy transition is held under Energy Transitions Working Group, addressing three priorities on accessibility, technology, and financing. We have done the first of ETWG in Yogyakarta, 24 to 25 March. We will convene again in Labuan Bajo, 23 to 25 June 2022. In the first ETWG, G20 members and invitees unanimously endorsed the three priorities in energy transition and the main agenda, heading towards the key deliverable on global deal to accelerate energy transition in the minister meeting and leader summit in Bali. We call off these stages as the road to Bali. Realizing the road to Bali between the ATWG meetings, we will deepen issues of energy transition through the series of virtual webinars. Today's webinar on solar, wind, and ocean energy will continue the journey of energy transition discussion throughout the presidency year. To the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, I would like to convey our presidency's compliment for taking the strategic role as co-organizer of today's webinar. IRENA, as the largest international forum on renewable energy, congregates more than 160 member states. I believe IRENA will play global roles to advance renewable energy solutions for achieving Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals as well as preparing net zero emission future. So I will raise several essential points on the role of solar, wind, and ocean in expanding energy solutions from G20 perspective. First, solar energy, wind power, and ocean energy are the trident of renewable energy. The first two main energy, solar and wind power, now become the dominant sources of global renewables development. In terms of capacity, three-quarters of G20 countries are in the top 20 of global solar power installed capacity, while more than half of G20 countries is in the top 20 of global wind power installed capacity. On the other hand, ocean energy sources from wave, tidal, and thermal demonstrate huge potential. However, all those types are still in the early stages of commercialization. Ocean energies remain far more costly compared to solar and wind, while almost all of them are still in research and development throughout the world's region. Second, the epicentrum of global development and growth on solar and wind are in G20 countries in terms of capacity. However, in terms of combined share of solar and wind in the national power mix, many countries outside G20 are more progressive compared to G20 countries. Therefore, these become challenges for G20. Besides cleaning and greening electricity, it is a big question how solar and wind and later ocean energy will help G20 members to significantly reduce share of conventional energy use, develop clean industries, accelerate clean transport, and produce hydrogen. Third, affordability will always remain the key for upscaling renewables. In specific, for this webinar, we will have sessions for examining the ways to expand solar, wind, and ocean energy in Southeast Asia region, emerging economies, as well as developing countries. This is essential to ensure that the renewable scale up will be leaving no one behind. Fourth, even with competitiveness on economic scales, we still need more upscales of solar and wind power with innovative technologies. These innovations are not only onshore but also offshore. We can take note several of them, such as offshore wind power, floating solar PV, and floating wind turbines. In these significances, G20 Italian presidency last year has recommended for incorporating offshore renewables in national energy and climate policies. This must be supported by designing appropriate national and regional regulatory frameworks. International cooperation must be strengthened with shared interests, followed by more investment and projects in emerging economies and developing countries. Without further ado, to IRENA, all speakers, multi-level entities, all G20 members, and invited delegates, and all stakeholders, I wish you all have a successful webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yudo, for your opening remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, next, we will invite Mr. Dolph Gillen, Director, IRENA Innovation and Technology Center, International Renewable Energy Agency. Mr. Gillen, the stage is yours.
Is it gentlemen? Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the Indonesian G20 presidency, especially Chair Dwinanda Priyadi, for giving your opening remarks and highlighting the importance of the G20 in energy. I would also like to thank the representative of the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy of the Government of India for discussing the key role of India and the Troika Group. I'm happy to see the excellent participation in today's webinar and look forward to interesting discussions. ASEAN is one of the key regions that will determine the future of our global energy system and how it can be more compatible with global climate change agenda. The G20 can drive a global transition, but we also need action in emerging economies across ASEAN and beyond. We welcome the announcement that countries such as Indonesia will endeavor to become carbon neutral by the latest 2060 and as early as 2050 with international support. As our World Energy Transitions Outlook shows, globally we must be at net zero by 2050, and this can only be achieved by wide-scale coordinated action across all countries, and renewable energy has a key role to play in this. In order to meet this aim in Indonesia and elsewhere, we will need to scale up renewable electricity. The bulk of it will come from solar and wind, but also offshore renewables can play an important role. And as we indicated in the World Energy Transitions Outlook, electricity will account for more than half of final energy by 2050, and another 12% would come from hydrogen and e-fuels produced with renewable electricity. So this shows the key role of renewable sources we are discussing here today. As ARENA, we have been working with Indonesia for almost a decade on various projects, and we are now focusing on the larger topic of energy transition. We are producing the Indonesia Energy Transitions Outlook. For ASEAN as a whole, we will release our second renewable energy outlook in September. We're also currently working with the government of Malaysia on an energy transition outlook. These three endeavors show the critical role of solar, wind, and ocean technologies across the region. And I want to take this opportunity also to thank the government of Denmark, which has generously funded this work. Our work in Indonesia, Malaysia, and ASEAN region as a whole includes energy transition roadmap, as well as a power system transformation analysis, combined with renewables readiness assessment in Indonesia and Malaysia, and socio-economic analysis to bring a holistic and comprehensive view of the energy transition. So also to look into opportunities for job creation and for economic growth. We're looking forward to the upcoming ARENA Climate Investment Forum in Indonesia, early September, as a key international meeting to discuss the findings and how to translate that into action. Over the last year and a half, we have been engaging experts in all the countries of ASEAN, and we developed these outlooks, and we are grateful for the support of the ASEAN Secretariat and the Renewable Energy Subsector Network for the support. We're also grateful for the support and engagement of the ASEAN Center of Energy. The power system is of key importance in ASEAN, and in our most ambitious climate scenario, we expect electricity demand to increase over 5-fold between now and 2050. And this, combined with the need for the sector to become net zero, necessitates a shift in how all countries produce power. As the scenarios show, renewables will become a key backbone in that system, and this finding is also reconfirmed by other studies. But the radical shift is not just needed in the power sector. Wide-scale changes are also needed across demand sectors. In transport, biofuels and electrification can play a key role, and they need to grow to provide the majority of transport energy across the region. In buildings, clean cooking and energy efficiency are the two major topics that need strong focus, and in industry, a wide range of solutions is needed to tackle rising energy demand and emissions, Solutions include direct electrification, bioenergy, hydrogen, and its derivatives, amongst others. Therefore, today's discussions come at a perfect time to provide views on how ASEAN can accelerate its energy transition and what role the G20 can play in supporting this transition across the region. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you again for your participation today, and I look forward to a lively discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gillen, for your remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, our next agenda, we would like to invite Mr. Dadan Kusdiana, Director General of New Renewable Energy and Energy Conservation, Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, Indonesia, to deliver the keynote speech for today's event.
Thank you. Very good morning to all of you from Jakarta. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to my colleague, Chair and Co-Chair of the Energy Transition Working Group, Pak Yudo, and also to Pak Prahoro, and also to Mr. Dr. Gillen, Director of IRENA Innovation and Technology Center of IRENA, for the cooperation in conducting this workshop as part of G20 webinar series. This workshop will discuss the key technologies that will be needed to accelerate the energy transformation, with special focus on solar, wind, and ocean energy technologies. In particular, those kind of renewable energy are commonly available in many countries, and also provide insights into how these technologies can transform the energy system, in particular in this Southeast Asia region. It is indeed a great honor for me and also from my team here, and also I am looking forward for a fruitful discussion with all of you. We heard before, as the chair of G20 Energy Transition Working Group, Pak Yudo has mentioned that one of the priority issues in Indonesia's G20 presidency 2022 is the energy transition. It is a must, of course, in this climate global condition where 1.5 degrees remaining barely within our reach. This pressing issue becomes more real after the COP26 in Glasgow. One significant achievement was the Paris Agreement rulebook adoption in Glasgow. So it can be our momentum for the world to realize the climate actions. Many countries significantly increased their climate ambition while committing to broad and bold climate action. One of them is through the implementing of the energy transition. Just energy transition is very country specific. This must be carried out in various ways according to the energy potential, technological maturity, economically viable, and investment opportunities in every country. Energy access, technology, and financing are strategic keys to implement just energy transition. Developing countries and emerging economies like ASEAN play an important role in realizing the energy transition. ASEAN, we know, is one of the fastest growing regions in the world in terms of the electricity demand, which has grown more than 6% annually within the last 20 years. Although COVID-19 has impacted negatively to this growth, we believe we are now in the process of recovering, and the energy demand will increase as our economies continue to grow. For example, for us, Indonesia, we had an increase of electricity growth by 6% last year. This is also supported by enormous renewable sources, especially solar energy. This extraordinary potential on renewable energy can enable energy transition and ensure a long-term energy security. Since 2019, the ASEAN's new installed capacity has been mostly from renewable energy resources, which is in 2022, around 82% of the ASEAN new capacity is renewable energy resources. The scale up that is needed to do the energy transition is significant, moreover for solar, wind, and ocean, and this will need to be supported by the larger international community, in particular from G20 countries. The developing countries or emerging economies need assurance that their ambition will be met with the technical and financial support. In terms of Indonesia, we are committed, of course, to reduce the greenhouse gas emission, and in particular for the expansion of solar, wind, and ocean energy. We are in a tropical country, so we have everyday sun shining. We will be expanding of 10 gigawatt in the next 10 years coming from solar, and we are also developing wind energy with the size of 600 megawatt for the next 10 years. Ocean energy is even, in particular for us, is much more interesting, as Indonesia is the archipelagic country. So we do our cooperation with some developed countries, in particular with UK on this, with the target that this year we would like to have the first pilot project in the commercial implementation. So renewable development measures are concrete mitigation actions to achieve Paris Agreement. The Indonesia achievement on renewable energy utilization in the form of electricity generation capacity until the end of 2021 reached 11.6 gigawatt, and the biodiesel use reached 10 million kiloliter. This achievement of renewable energy in the national primary energy mix was 12.2% in 2021. However, this utilization of the existing potential is still very small, so we need to work hard together for developing these resources as a concrete effort. So the cost of developing renewable energy power plant is now more competitive compared to fossil energy, in particular for solar and wind. This is shown by a study conducted by IRENA in 2022 regarding the need for the cost of developing a renewable energy power plant. In general, the cost of developing this renewable energy power plant has decreased significantly globally over the last 10 years, especially for power plant whose construction can be carried out quickly, such as solar PV and wind. The realization of installed capacity tends to increase due to the reduce of solar PV and wind technology costs. We no longer view the intermittency issue as a problem for technology, since the renewable energy power plants could also be as baseload or peaker. We need to act and start early to maximize the implementation, not only for the next generation, but also for fuel substituting fossil fuel and also for the greenhouse gas reductions. Mapping out the challenges and also enabling factors for the energy transition is especially beneficial in determining the types of policies and strategies needed to be taken out by public institutions and corporations, such as providing financial incentive for renewable energy development, implementing research and development technologies, building robust infrastructure to accommodate variable renewable energy and electrification in demand sector, as well as increasing socialization efforts to increase awareness in the emission reductions. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, Indonesia's goal at the G20 is to accelerate the energy transition to sustainable recovery and productivity, implemented by strengthening the global clean energy system and equitable transitions, among others through energy accessibility, security, upgrading smart and clean energy technologies, and also advancing energy finance. So I do sincerely hope that this event, as part of the G20 side event, will provide some recommendations or inputs to our that currently being prepared common principles in accelerating clean energy transition, what it is called as the Bali Compact, as well as also the concrete deliverables of Indonesia's G20 presidency. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dadan Kusdiana, for the keynote speech. Ladies and gentlemen, in a moment, we will have the presentation on the energy transition in ASEAN and beyond, key insights from Irina's World Energy Transitions Outlook and ASEAN Regional Outlook. The presentation will be presented by Mr. Nicholas Wagner, Program Officer, Renewable Energy Roadmaps. Mr. Wagner, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much to the organizers, the government of Indonesia, to all the partners and all the panelists and speakers. My name is Nicholas Wagner. I'm a program officer working in the Renewable Energy Roadmaps team at the Irina Innovation and Technology Center in Bonn, Germany. I will be presenting today in about 25 minutes a perspective, a scene setting presentation that looks at what our World Energy Transitions Outlook says about the global energy transition, and then I'll provide some initial insights from the work that we're doing in ASEAN. So if you could bring up the presentation, please. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. In case you don't know Irina, we're a relatively young organization. We celebrated last year our 10th anniversary. We have near universal membership with 184 countries, and we have several offices, including the headquarters in Abu Dhabi, with the majority of the divisions and the Innovation Technology Center here in Bonn, Germany. Next slide, please. I would just like to overview a little bit the activities that we're doing. Next slide, please. We have this webinar today. We're very grateful for the government of Indonesia for inviting us to organize this and support them. We also have an interesting webinar next week on two of the most topical issues, which is hydrogen and storage. So I encourage anybody who's interested to listen in on that. And we will have other engagements over the year, both in Singapore and elsewhere. It was mentioned earlier, the investment summit that we'll have in Indonesia in early September. Dolph mentioned what we're doing in the region that's of relevance. We have a regional outlook for ASEAN that we're releasing. We have two energy transition outlooks that we're doing for Malaysia and Indonesia. We have a look at urban transport in Thailand. We're also doing NDC support in Indonesia, Laos, and Cambodia, amongst many other things. Next slide, please. And just to overview the Remap team, we do activities from global all the way down to country level. We're the primary source of the scenario analysis for the World Energy Transitions Outlooks, our global reports. We do the similar energy systems analysis for regional and country activities and thematic activities as well. So a lot of good and interesting information and resources out there if you want to know about the future transition pathway for countries, regions, or globally. Next slide, please. So now to the gist of what we'd like to discuss today. So overall driving the energy transition or the climate ambition is the need to reduce CO2 emissions. So any trajectory into the future has different possible futures, you could say. For us, the most relevant in terms of the most likely pathway is what we call the planned energy scenario. So this is what we view as the most likely trajectory based on government's plans or
rencana
that have
pemerintah
been integrated into law or acted upon, not aspirational. So you can see here that based on that, you are able to reduce growth in emissions to sort of a flat line, but those emissions stay at levels consistent more or less with today. So around 36, 37 gigatons annually of energy-related CO2. What we need to do is we need to get to net zero by 2050. It's a big task, but it's possible, and it requires emission reductions across all segments of the energy system and outside the energy system. We focus on the energy system. And you can see the relative contribution there of the different sectors. Next slide, please. It's important to note that there is a difference between what has been integrated into plans or acted upon, or you could say that is instilled in the government process or in a national economy's process, and what is an aspirational target. So we see that based on the latest COP announcements, so those that came out of Glasgow last year, and quite a number of countries have committed to net zero around mid-century, including Indonesia, but also a lot of large energy producers. We see that the actual emissions have reduced by about half, more or less. Now, we don't consider this in the planned energy scenario at this moment because most of those have not been operationalized, meaning they've not been ingrained in national law or put into effect in energy planning. But nonetheless, there is an aspirational objective there, and that's certainly a big improvement, but it's not enough. We need to get to net zero emissions at least. So there's still about an 18, 19 gigaton gap that needs to be addressed. And oftentimes that gap is in the most difficult sectors to reduce emissions in. Next slide, please. So we show here that there's no silver bullet. There's not a single type of technology that can fix all of the world's problems. In the power sector, which isn't shown here, as you'll see later, there is an extremely important role for renewable energy. But outside, when we start looking at the sources of energy demand, what's called the end-use sectors, there's really a diverse set of technologies and measures that are needed that include renewables. This is direct use of renewables in the blue. The electricity component of renewables, electrification would be shown in yellow. But energy efficiency is a first principle, is very important. Hydrogen comes into play primarily in industry and transport. And there's still a need, particularly in industry, for carbon removal technologies like CCS or afforestation or other removal types of technologies. Next slide, please. So we've mapped out in our scenarios a perspective. We call it the 1.5C scenario. And we have several indicators, high-level indicators that indicate the level of transition need. One is the share of renewables in electricity generation. That needs to go up, increase from about a quarter to about 90%. So the vast majority of renewables of electricity supply is from renewable sources. Total energy, we see also a similarly high share, approaching 3/4, and final energy are slightly higher. The level of investment energy efficiency needs to increase by about 6 times, from about 250 billion per year to about 1.5 trillion per year. The share of electricity and final energy needs to increase to over 50%. We need to see about 600 million megatons of hydrogen production and its derivatives, so hydrogen used for other e-fuels or derivatives. And there is still an important need, particularly in industry, for carbon dioxide removal technologies. Next slide, please. And what we see is there is energy growth occurring in our planned energy scenario, about 800 exajoule per year globally. What we're able to do in the 1.5C scenario is reduce that through efficiency and electrification, and then also increase the share of renewables to about 3/4 in primary energy terms. And this entails about an 8x acceleration of the deployment of renewables across the energy system. So 8 times faster deployment of all the technologies that would be considered renewables. Next slide, please. And if we look at the energy mix and final energy terms, you can see how the energy system evolves over the period. So we have a system that's dominated about 3/4 or more with natural gas, coal, and oil today. And then we see a shift to roughly half electricity, majority of which is renewables. An important role for bioenergy, sustainable bioenergy, of course, and then a growing role for hydrogen, and I'll discuss that later. But there's still oil, coal, and a little bit of, oil, natural gas, and a little bit of coal in the system. Next slide, please. And interestingly, what we've been saying for a decade is starting to be reflected now more recently in countries and other organizations' plans. So this important role of electrification, being between 50 and 60% of final energy, depending on the countries, and renewables share upwards of 70 to 80% in primary energy supply is what even the most recent IEA scenarios and what many government plans, at least the ones we've analyzed, are starting to say as well. So you see a sort of a coalesce of perspectives on the role of electricity and renewables into broadly, consistently, this shows just the key importance of those two technology avenues. Next slide, please. And what's driving the change? Well, it was mentioned earlier by the Indonesian, both the speakers, that frankly, renewable power technologies have seen incredible cost declines. This is something that's not new. We've known this. They continue. They are declining less quickly than they did over the last 10 to 15 years, but they are still declining in cost. And the fossil fuel price band is actually increasing, broadly speaking. So the top part of that gray area is increasing based on recent geopolitical developments, but in general, the fossil fuel cost has not been decreasing in most markets. So renewables compete, particularly solar and wind, but other technologies are also competitive. Almost all of them compete now on cost. Yeah, thank you, that's fine. The result is that they're extremely competitive. We already see in our reference case significant growth in renewable technologies. But what we see in our climate consistent case 1.5C is very significant growth in electricity. So roughly it grows 3 times from 30,000 terawatt hours to 90,000 terawatt hours. And the amount of renewable capacity increases very significantly relative to where we are today. So we see, 14 thousand gigawatts or 14 terawatts of capacity. And we see, 8,000 in onshore wind, a lot of offshore wind. Ocean energy has a role in some locations. There is still some mainly natural gas in the power system for flexibility, but the overwhelming majority of the system is 90% renewable based. Next slide, please. I just want to talk briefly about what that implies in terms of materials and rare earths and other things. There are a bunch of you're moving from combusting a fuel into producing technologies, and those technologies need metals and they need magnets, storage technologies, electric vehicles. So we've mapped out in the latest World Energy Transition Outlook some of the key materials and minerals needs. So you can see here how obviously copper is part of the electricity system with transmission and also motors, needs to more or less double annual production to about 50 to 70 million megatons per year. We see nickel growth also on the order of about 2 to 3x growth. Lithium needs to grow incredibly. And you can see there that's basically a 10x growth. There was concern a few years ago about lithium supply, mainly used in electric vehicles and other batteries, but it appears that supply is catching up to demand. And neodymium, which is used in magnets, also needs very significant growth. Next slide, please. In the topic of solar PV, roughly 1 terawatt of capacity is in operation globally as of this year, more or less. We think there needs to be 14. So we need to see a 14x growth over the next 30 years. So it's an incredible market, and it's a market that's currently dominated by China, both in silicon production, wafer cells, and modules, roughly 3/4. So even though that's a lot of dominance in China, the growth that's needed to achieve the 14 terawatt hours does present an opportunity for manufacturing. So it's important to know that many countries could capitalize on this, both from the materials needed to produce those ingots and wafers through the manufacturing of panels and all the ancillary equipment that's surrounded by that. So I just wanted to point out that this is a tremendous growth opportunity. Next slide. And many countries are well placed. Since the materials need is quite diverse, many countries have materials supply chains that could benefit from this. You already see on the left there that Indonesia, for instance, Philippines, even Myanmar, are already globally active, and they can become more active. And then, of course, you need to process and refine and produce those materials into products. And also, again, here, while China is dominant, Indonesia has a presence, as does Malaysia, and other countries in the ASEAN region could benefit from this. So it's an economic opportunity. Next slide, please. And yet the size of the market is tremendous. We estimate in our 1.5C scenario that globally about 130 trillion US dollars needs to be invested into the energy system. That's a $4.5 trillion per year need, and you can see it spread amongst many different types of investments, but nonetheless, pretty substantial investment. Next slide, please. And Southeast Asia is an important driver. There's obviously large markets elsewhere, but roughly 140 billion per year will need to be invested in energy transition type technologies, as listed there. This is a snapshot. Next slide, please. We've mapped out in the report, I don't intend people to read this, but go to the report. We have a lot of key indicators that talk about technology scale up, whether or not they're progressing the way that they should be, or we need to accelerate. In almost all cases, they're at the very lowest level of progress. Some cases they're in the middle, but we need policies and plans and government action in almost every category to get us on track. Next slide, please. And one more. So now I'll talk about the preliminary results from our ASEAN work. It's not the first time we've done a scenario analysis and reports in ASEAN, but this is the first time we're taking a energy transition view, so looking just beyond renewables to all energy technologies and over the longer term, so consistent with net zero. And it's work that we do together with ASEAN member states, with the ASEAN Center for Energy, funded by the government of Denmark. And we're obviously aware that there's other work, such as the ASEAN Energy Outlook 6 and 7 and the ASEAN Energy Connection Master Plan. So we're taking these scenario analyses and these perspectives into account and adding it to our own toolkit to produce the second Renewable Energy Outlook for ASEAN, which includes a regional power system flexibility analysis using our flex tool, as well as a socioeconomic analysis. Next slide, please. And the drivers are clear. I think anybody who's active in the region knows. This is a region that will see 5% annualized growth over the period in GDP. You see population growing to about 800 million people. The electricity demand has grown on average about 6% per year over the last decade, pre-COVID, but we expect this to return to the norm. And the region has actually seen growing fossil fuel supply dependency, so import dependency. So if you have energy demand growth and then you import more, you're just going to become more reliant on those international markets and not indigenous supply. So there are some near-term targets. There's a 23% renewable energy share in total final energy that needs to increase from about 17, 18% today in the next few years. So that will be challenging. There's also a target for 35% renewable share in power capacity and a reduction in energy intensity. So there are some near-term targets, but we think it's very important to inform ASEAN member states in the region on what maybe their next step needs to consider over the medium to long term in terms of where they need to head. And of course, that needs to all be aligned with a net zero aim by mid-century. That's the way that the international community is moving. And so I think all countries need to orient themselves towards an expectation that in the next 30 years, more or less, they will need to become net zero. Next slide, please. So in terms of growth in the region, we see energy demand increasing about 2.5 times in a reference case in the planned energy scenario. And the growth is across the board in energy, but primarily in oil products, a little bit of natural gas, and growth in electricity. So this is the most likely scenario. You can see the relative importance of different countries there on the right. And annualized, the growth has decoupled a bit from GDP, which is a trend we see everywhere, where GDP growth and energy demand growth doesn't grow exactly the same. It grows a little bit less. So we see roughly a 4% growth, annualized growth. A lot of that being driven by electricity. Next slide, please. So in our what we would call our decarbonized energy scenario, which is 1.5C aligned, we are able through efficiency and electrification to reduce demand by about 20%. So that already goes a long way towards reducing some level of import dependency, energy usage in general, emissions, externalities, et cetera. And we see significant growth in electricity. So the result is the mix that you see on the right. We see growth in bioenergy, electricity, and a decline in all fossil fuels, but still a role that some of those have to play. You see the introduction of hydrogen, for instance, though its contribution is relatively limited. Next slide, please. And one thing we do see is significant growth in electricity demand. And for this, we've also done more of a baseline capacity expansion that shows absent any policies, you let the market run, you would actually see quite a lot of coal development. We do not think this is the most likely scenario reference case. That's the planned energy scenario, the third bar in the middle. But nonetheless, in that scenario already, there's significant growth in solar PV. So already over 500 gigawatts of solar PV across the region, and growth in hydropower and natural gas. But what needs to happen is we need to move towards the furthest bar on the right, which has growth, even more growth in electricity demand because of electrification and transport and other end uses, and sees a very significant shift in terms of the technology mix. And so you can see there over 2,000 gigawatts of solar PV, for instance, lots of wind. And there needs to be some dispatchable power. So there is some thermal efficient capacity in there. Now, this is still preliminary. We'll come out with our final scenario analysis at the beginning of September. So this will be tweaked. We understand the complexities around some of these technologies, so we're still working on that. But I wanted to provide some perspective. I just want to also point out the regional interconnection is very important. And we'll be looking into that. Next slide, please. We talk a lot about hydrogen. Hydrogen is an important energy vector and enabling technology, but it's not the most important. In ASEAN, bioenergy is more important than hydrogen, and electricity is more important than hydrogen. Nonetheless, it does have a role, particularly in industry. So you can see there on the right side, the upper right, the modes in which we think hydrogen is most applicable. So in chemicals and refining, steel manufacturing, we think that there's a potential for ammonia use in shipping, and then some other high temperature applications. It has less of a use in those low priorities where we think you should electrify. Nonetheless, we do have, frankly, significant hydrogen demand across the region, roughly 11 million megatons per year in 2050 in our scenario. This excludes international bunkering. So, you know, the fuel used for international shipping in Singapore and elsewhere. So it's domestic demand. And 11 million megatons is roughly 10% of today's hydrogen demand. Today, we have a lot more in the future, but nonetheless, it's a significant number. And how that's produced and supplied is a very good question. And there will be a hydrogen supply perspective that we produce when we come out with our report. Next slide, please. And I just want to also point out that transmission is very important. The region has tremendous renewables potential across the region, but it is a bit divergent. So there's a lot of untapped hydro potential in the north. There's strong wind potential along the coast of Vietnam. There's solar potential everywhere, but there's a lot in the south. There's also interconnection that can be achieved to the north with China and the south of Australia. There's already the ASEAN Interconnection Master Plan. There are plans to expand that transmission. We'll try to provide a perspective in our report in about 3 months on where some expansion could occur. And we think it's crucial that this is actually achieved because it will go a long way towards the region meeting their goals without having to become independent, each country in the region or groups of countries. They should really think more transnational. Next slide, please. So to summarize, We see energy demand growing across the region. That's quite substantial. So, you know, 2.5 times energy demand growth, electricity growing 5 to 6-fold, and import dependency is rising. We see that renewable energy can meet a majority of energy supply looking forward, and in the process, reduce emissions significantly. So this is also something we're working on in the final picture, but you'll see that the region is able to reduce from today, or from a reference case in particular, emissions very significantly, consistent with the net zero pathway. The key technologies include everything, more or less, that's clean energy, electrification, biofuels, hydrogen, efficiency, solar, wind, hydro. Ocean has potential, but needs further exploration, and there still is a need for carbon dioxide removal in certain sectors. Investment, the incremental investment, so the additional amount that needs to be invested to move from a planned energy scenario to a decarbonized energy scenario, the 1.5C, is about 3 trillion over the period. So it's about 100 billion per year. So it's a very palatable number. And importantly, our initial analysis shows that the energy system cost of the decarbonized energy scenario is slightly lower than the planned energy scenario. So this can be done once you look at total cost, fuel demand, annuity, operation maintenance, at a similar to lower cost than what you do in the reference case, given the way that all these technologies are moving in the domestic resource. Importantly, if ASEAN moves in this direction, this creates an incredible economic opportunity for supply and manufacturing. And we think that this then makes the compelling case, and we hope we're able to communicate that. So with that flavor, I would like to thank everyone for listening and turn it back over to the moderator. Thank you very much, and I wish a fruitful discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner, for the remarkable and insightful presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, our distinguished guests, we are about to begin the talk show with our panelists of experts. On our panel today are Mr. Zulfikar Yurnaidi, Senior Officer of Sustainable Energy, Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Department, ASEAN Center for Energy. Ms. Lisa Tinchert, Director of Energy Program, GIZ Indonesia, ASEAN. Mr. Anders Cruz, Country Manager for Indonesia, Danish Energy Agency. Mr. Florian Kit, Senior Energy Specialist, Asia Development Bank, ADB. Ms. Ngo To Nguyen, Executive Director, Vietnam Initiative for Energy Transition. The panel discussion will be moderated by Mr. Fabi Tumiwa, Executive Director of Institute for Essential Services Reform. Mr. Fabi Tumiwa is an energy transition strategist and the Executive Director of the Institute for Essential Services Reform, an Indonesia think tank in energy policy and environment. IESR advocates for the low-carbon energy transition in Indonesia. Mr. Fabi has been working on energy policy and regulation for more than 20 years, as well as a practitioner of renewable energy, advising various Indonesia government agencies, businesses, and NGOs, as well as multilateral development organization in electricity regulation, renewable energy, and energy efficiency policy and regulation, and climate change policy. Fabi Tumiwa is one of the founder of the Indonesia Solar Energy Association in 2016 and was with the Executive Committee on Institutional Cooperation of Indonesia Energy Efficiency and Energy Conservation Society. Mr. Fabi Tumiwa, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Lenke, for the introductions. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the panel discussions on the expanding solar, wind, and ocean energy in the Asian region and other emerging countries. And today we have five excellent speakers from Indonesia and Denmark and Vietnam. I'm happy that I chair this session. I think I know most of you, and we met in the day to met in different occasion before. So we have Mr. Sulfikar Yurnaidi, and he is the Senior Officer of Sustainable Energy, Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Department, ASEAN Center for Energy. Good afternoon, Mr. Sulfikar.
Good afternoon, Mr.
And second, we have my friends also. We are implementing the joint project together. Ms. Lisa Tinshert, Director of Energy Program, GIZ Indonesia, and also ASEAN. Lisa, good afternoon.
Hello, Fabi. Good to see you.
And also we have Mr. Andres Cruz, Country Manager for Indonesia, Danish Energy Agency. Anders, good afternoon.
Good afternoon and good morning from Denmark.
Oh, you are in Denmark. Okay.
I'm in Copenhagen.
Yeah. And also my colleagues, Florian Kitt, Senior Energy Specialist, Asia Development Bank. How are you, Florian?
Very well. Hello, everyone.
Are you in Jakarta or somewhere else?
I'm in Jakarta.
Jakarta.
Thanks for making me Indonesian in the introduction. Much appreciated.
And last but not least, Ms. Ngo Nien. Nien also is we are member of this case project implementing the project in Southeast Asia, and Nien, Executive Director of Vietnam Initiative for Energy Transition. Good afternoon, Nien. How are you?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much to invite me to participate in this meeting.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, participants to these events, we have slightly now is like 55 minutes to start our discussion, and since we have 5 speakers, I would like to the speakers to have a brief presentations, and so we have maximum 7 minutes, so we can have ample time for discussion later. And before Mr. Wagner has show us the roadmap for energy transition in Southeast Asia. There is a couple of renewable energy potentials that can be should be developed to meet net zero emission target. But also, if we look at the investment required for this transition, is also enormous, around 100 billion average annually. Right, so it's not easy task, I think, but that's the cost to make our energy system resilient, reliable, and sustainable. So I would like to start with Mr. Sulfikar Yurnaidi. You have 7 minutes to present. The screen is yours, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Maybe a bit of introductions about the ASEAN Center for Energy, or we call it ACE. So we are the intergovernmental organization within the ASEAN structure that represents the 10 ASEAN member states' interests in the energy sector. So we basically serve ASEAN member states as a think tank, catalyst, and also knowledge hub for energy in the region. I think in talking about the energy transitions, one thing that I want to point out before is the several trends that are currently happening in the energy region, energy globally and also regionally. First, of course, the recovery from the pandemic situations, followed by the Russia and Ukraine crisis, has been driven the discussions of the energy in the global and also in the regions. So those trends basically bring back the concern of energy price and energy security to the top and center of energy discussions. Meanwhile, at the same time, countries, including ASEAN member states, have shown this trend of carbon neutrality, the net zero. which either through detailed plans, through their NDCs or the long-term strategies, but also through the statements by government officials. And this include Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Laos, which has the target of net zero by 2050, Singapore beyond 2050, Indonesia 2060, and also some other countries in the region. Meanwhile, in the region itself, in terms of energy, we are basically guided by the regional energy blueprints, which we call the APAEC, which the latest version of it taking the theme of enhancing energy connectivity and market integration in ASEAN to achieve the energy security, accessibility, affordability, and sustainability for all. Of course, it also aims to accelerate the energy transitions and strengthening energy resilience through greater innovations and cooperations. So it's actually looking at those trends globally and in the ASEAN and also the region energy system. What it is quite clear that this energy transition needs to simultaneously pursue the climate target, but also addressing the issues of security and prices. And a just energy transition is what we need, something that does not abandon the principle of security, equity, and also affordability, which is just basically the philosophy of energy transition in ASEAN. With that, it is, I think, what crucial to have a clear economic benefits to be used as an incentive for the energy transitions. For example, strategies in renewable energy must be framed in its role to improve the energy dependency, to improve the energy diversification, which in turn is impacting a better energy security. Similarly to energy efficiency, it needs to be promoted as a way to reduce energy demand while attaining the same level of economic growth. I think on those fields, the region ASEAN have been doing quite well, especially if we are looking at the regional targets to achieve the RE for 23% in TPS and 35% in installed power capacity by 2025. And in terms of amid the pandemic, we have seen that the growth of RE in the region has been outstanding. And then by 2020, for example, 33.5% of installed capacity in the region is already in form of renewables, mostly hydro in Laos, PDR, and other countries in the Mekong regions, and also solar, which is led by Vietnam for the past 2 years. But what we are seeing currently in the data is that the targets in terms of RE share in TPS has not been yet enough to achieve the regional target, which is 23% in the TPS. And the study that we are currently conducting, the 7 ASEAN Energy Outlook, to be launched in the 40th AMEM, ASEAN Ministers of Energy meeting this year, show that accelerated and concerted effort are still needed, especially in line with the pandemic recovery. And this includes the variable renewable energy, solar, wind, ocean, but also on how we can utilize these technologies as part of a base generations. So technologies such as storage, grid strengthening would be very crucial for us if you want to develop further this renewable energy, solar, hydro, solar, wind, and ocean. And of course, the utilizations of hydropower, geothermal, and also bioenergy must be accelerated as well, so that this development of renewable energy can really support the energy security and also the economic growth in the future. But again, to lead this energy transition, as mentioned by our moderator, it needs huge financing. And I also very agree with what mentioned by Pak Yudo in the beginning. This energy transition needs to be centered in the access, the technology, and financing. All of those are very in line with what we have in our energy blueprint in the region. Referring back to the APEC sub-team, we want to have the cooperations and innovation as the key. Since transitioning this big ship that is ASEAN energy sector would require concerted efforts and support, especially, of course, finance. That how can we generate this finance? Of course, support from the countries, including those of G20, will be very important. But what is also important, I think, drawing lessons from what we have in Vietnam in their solar economic growth will be to have a strong local interest, strong public trust, a strong a political will to push this renewable energy moving forward. How to create a supporting environment, good incentives, fiscal policies. As we know, the Vietnam had a very good and strong feed-in tariffs. This is coupled, of course, with enabling investment environment in the land lease, in the tax support, etc. And that pull the interest from the investors around the world to develop the solar net. And I think something similar can be done in the region. Last but not least, I think what is also important for the region is targets are important. I mean, you know, even the global financing mentioned that they have a target of gathering 10 billion, 100 billion every year. But what are more important is to have the implementation itself. So we need to have something that is ambitious but attainable and clear roadmap, and this should be built upon actions and milestones that need to be complemented with strong capacity, regulatory related, financial, and also technical. And again, maybe one last that I want to mention is that, again, this solar, wind, and ocean, we have a lot of resources in the region, but to turn that into real capacity, and then in turn, turning the capacity into real electricity generations coming from the renewable, it will need a very strong supporting technologies, and this would include storage and also grid strengthening. I think I will stop there and
thank you,
Mr. Tabi.
Thank you, Pak Sulfikar. I think you have explained and share about what APAEC is doing. Well, the questions I think I would like to you before I give the opportunity to others. Question is, you as we have recovered from COVID, so in the last 2 years we all dealing with this COVID pandemics. Do you see any change in ASEAN plans to increase renewable energy? As you mentioned that, well, there is some country actually quite advanced in Southeast Asia now with renewable energy, but some country are lacking. Well, I have to say Indonesia is the largest country, but we are lacking, I think, in meeting that target. And you see, you also mentioned that it requires a number of acceleration to meet that regional target, 23% by 2025. So how do you see this post-COVID? Would that be possible for ASEAN country to accelerate? And what the current discussion right now in the region when it comes to meeting this target?
Yeah, thank you. And I think it's quite interesting that you mentioned about Indonesia, because Indonesia is the largest country in terms of energy use. And wherever Indonesia goes, ASEAN will follow in terms of energy and renewable energy target. Both actually also have the same target, 23% in TPS by 2025. And as mentioned, in the pandemic, actually the growth of RE is still very good. I think 80% of added capacity in 2020 is coming from renewable. But moving forward, what I think will be very important is not only in capacity, because like the case in Vietnam, we have a huge capacity, but since the grid and also the demand side is not enough to absorb that, curtailment of the energy are starting happening over there. So I think strengthening the grid will be very important. So we cannot do that after we have all of this VRE joining to the grid, but it needs to be planned in the beginning. So upgrading the transmission system will be very important. But I think in terms of improving the share of renewable itself, I think we had several efforts in the region. First is we want to connect more the financing sector. I think that would be very crucial. And we are also currently trying to build what we call the long-term renewable energy roadmap. So it's beyond 2025, which is our target year, but also something beyond that. And also, of course, to explore various technologies, supporting policies that I think are very important for the country. So again, Vietnam has become a success case, but I think it needs to be translated or also like scaled into other countries in the region, probably including Indonesia. I think especially for Indonesia, one thing that we might need urgently is the renewable energy law, which might provide the some sort of security and also consistency for the investors, private sectors to start entering into the renewable energy market in the country, and probably similar to the other countries in ASEAN. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to turn to Lisa now. Lisa Tinscher from GIZ. Lisa, what do you think about the role of solar, wind, and ocean energy in empowering or accelerate the energy transition in ASEAN? What is the role do you see in this region?
Thank you so much, Fabi. And thank you also for the organizers, Payudo, Padaran, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to participate in this discussion. And yeah, we already heard some really interesting facts, I think, from the presentation from Irina and Pazulika. You mentioned quite a few commitments by the government and the ongoing challenges and what needs to be done going forward. If I reflect a bit on the position I'm in, so I'm working for GIZ, so on behalf of the German government. I'm in Indonesia mainly. I also work on the CASE project that Fabi mentioned that has a Southeast Asia focus. And what we can see, there's a lot of discussion right now, right? We see a lot of scenarios and pathways popping up. Net zero emissions is the big topic. Countries start to commit to specific targets. We see Indonesia 2060, and then there's all these pathways and scenarios, and there's a lot of technology choices. And we see scenarios of a high share of renewables coming in. Might we also see questions, okay, what about nuclear? What about CCS for so carbon capture and storage technology for coal-fired power plants? What about the role of hydrogen? Well, it's complicated. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's also conflicting information out there. And I, as a professional working in the energy transition and also as a proponent for renewable energy, I think the big the benefit and also the strong role of renewables is that it can deliver on all three pillars of sustainable energy. So we look at social impact, so a just transition, an affordable transition, economic impact, so talking about energy security, but also competitiveness, prices falling for renewables, and of course environmental concerns. So right now, I think we are really at a point in time where the climate crisis meets the energy crisis, and what are the answers? And I think renewables can provide a lot of these answers. When we look now at ASEAN, I think we already mentioned has a vast potential for renewables. Already started using it, but there's much more that can be done. I think from what I hear, and especially in Indonesia, there's a special focus on affordability and the economic viability of the energy transition, of the technologies we choose going forward. And I think there's a lot of evidence already out there, especially for renewables. So I think there's these two ways on how we can increase the role and the impact and the usage of renewables. On the one side is learning from all of these experiences are already out there. There's as Padaran also mentioned, there's the largest share of new installations are renewable based. So there's a lot of evidence already out there. A lot of investment decisions are being made already based on economic considerations for renewable energy. But on the other side, also see the energy transition and renewables as an opportunity. So Padaran was also mentioning, okay, the challenges differ, right? Not all countries are equal. Indonesia is a different country than Germany. In Germany, you have maybe the heating challenge. You don't have that problem. In Indonesia, you rather have a cooling challenge. So I think here it's an opportunity for ASEAN to think about, okay, what could be renewable energy solutions really adapted to the specific circumstances of countries or ASEAN as such. So you have countries, of course, which have an island setting, very particular challenges lie in that, and of course the prevailing climate, being close to the equator, bioenergy was mentioned. And with such, I think there's a lot of encouraging and I think first signs of new ideas coming in. I think we see examples of agrivoltaic, so the combination of agriculture and PV installations. I think Vietnam does it in aquaculture. There's a pilot also in Indonesia providing shades for agricultural crops. We have the floating solar project in Indonesia. There's cooling applications from PV. A solar ice maker is being launched this year. Then, of course, the whole mini-grid, renewable energy-based mini-grid experience. So I think there's a lot to build upon and use really the energy transition, which is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for innovation and also to bring in the private sector. As Payudo said, the opportunities, I think, for innovation are big, and I think that the main focus is really now on creating the right enabling framework for this to happen.
Yeah. Lisa, this year, Germany is the chair of G7, and Indonesia is the president of G20, and Germany, as EU, also member of G20. In this case, how do you see the closer cooperation with G20 with G20 and German? How can this cooperation support the transition in Indonesia and also in Southeast Asia?
Thank you, Fabi. Yeah, I think it's quite a special year for me as a German working in Indonesia. So G7 chair for Germany and Indonesia, the G20 chair. So you can imagine there's a lot of discussions going on, and I think there's really quite a spirit of cooperation. I can see that in both groups and in both countries. So I think overall the importance of cooperation is really heightened, and it's absolutely clear we cannot achieve global targets without international cooperation. So what is of course also obvious and very encouraging is that in both groups, G7, G20, there is the strong importance and the relevance on the focus on a clean energy transition. There's strong commitments, and there's now discussions, okay, how to foster this cooperations. New partnerships are being discussed between two countries who want to really lead and move forward for the just energy transition, and willing to support more, but also willing to really increase ambition and step forward. And I think that's a very dynamic discussion and great to see. I think on the level of cooperation, I mean, on the one side, it's these multilateral cooperations where Germany is also working in these two forums. But then also we see, of course, Germany has also traditionally been, of course, a strong supporter and working on partnerships with several countries here in the ASEAN region and also ASEAN itself. So we also have, through GIZ, we implement a project with ACE, for example, working on the energy outlook. And also bilaterally. So how can what can Germany offer and also to support the energy transition? It's through, on the one side, the technical cooperation we work with the governments on improving and strengthening the regulatory frameworks, really to create the incentives, enabling framework for renewables, but also energy efficiency. There's knowledge exchange, capacity development is something that we do a lot. So providing trainings. Also, we work closely with PLN, for example, the utility here in Indonesia, and looking also at green job opportunities. So that's the technical arm, and Germany, of course, also has the financial arm through KfW to provide loans to invest into projects. One more thing I would like to mention on these different type of cooperations, what I can also see, which is really relevant, which is a mixture between these bilateral and multilateral approaches, is the triangular cooperation. And this is also something where Germany and Indonesia is very happy to currently prepare an initiative that will be launched soon on triangular cooperation in the topic of decentralized energy, renewable energy. So this is really about using the experience from Indonesia that has developed more than 1,000 mini-grids in renewable energy sector. And how can this experience also be shared with other countries? And other countries could be any countries that have a decentralized renewable energy challenge. So we talk about, of course, other island countries, but also Africa. So really create this triangular cooperation, this support to really make use that the lessons are being learned, that good practices can be duplicated, and that through a cooperative approach we can further accelerate the renewable energy-based energy transition.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm now going to Anders. Anders, the latest finding of ASEAN and Indonesia taken from arenas as presented earlier, and also study from different partners, including Danish Energy Agency, often shows that there's a key role for renewable energy with a very significant scale up of solar and wind. And we know that Danish Energy Agency has been working on wind in the region, also in Indonesia for a couple of time, for quite some time. So what can the region learn from the other country that have seen this type of scale up? Because I think that's the question, how we in this region can scale up the solar and wind. What can we learn from the previous from the experience, country like Denmark, and how Denmark apply this knowledge and experience to Indonesia and the regional context?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Fabi. Good to see you, and also thank you to Arena for having this arrangement and great report. Thank you to Pakdan and Daran and Paguro, great partners of us. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I can say, first of all, we work in Danish Energy Agency with 19 different countries, here including Indonesia, where I have my knowledge. We also work with Vietnam, for example, who's present here today. And yeah, what can we learn from like the Danish experience? I would say now we post-COVID and we tap right into kind of a global energy crisis with rising prices for fossils. And I think this is a good kicker actually to accelerate into the renewable energy with the high energy prices we see from the war in Ukraine, etc. And this was also actually the driver for Denmark back in the 70s, 80s during the oil crisis, that we have to be independent and therefore start developing renewable energy. Back then it was hugely expensive. Today, luckily, it's competitive, which I think makes a big difference. And this is an able to tap into it. And for Indonesia, now there is even larger economic ideas to look into the trade balance, not to import as much oil, import maybe the ability to export coal and tax that. We have seen in other countries that have worked to tax the polluting sources of energy, and with that use it for investing in green technologies. And another thing which we use a lot is the energy planning, which we also see Irene have done, and many of the other panelists here have been working with. And I think we kind of get the same results in a large extent. And one thing is to look in the long perspective towards net zero in 2050, 2060. But first, as Mr. Wagner also said, this decade is the most important one to kick it off. And therefore, I think we should look into the known technologies that we have for Indonesia, the proven technologies that we know works, and we have seen many places around the world being developed and integrated well, and tap into those potentials first, but of course still have the long glasses on and look into the future and start developing towards that. I know that Indonesia has, for example, a lot of hydropower in their RUPTL, the electricity plan, which is very important, but that's something that takes many years to develop. So that development should start, but for the now and here situation, solar and also wind in some cases is very fast to implement and to get into the system. We mainly focus on the larger grids in our corporation, since that's where Denmark has its knowledge. So I'm glad to hear that GIZ are looking into many of the microgrids, because that's also important. But my eyes are on the larger grids, where you can still implement so much solar. There's so much non-use potential. There's still a lot of diesel generators working as base load. So a first step would be to change all of those as fast as possible. That is by far also a bankable solution. So it's about to tap into these potentials first. And then after that, go further into the next parts of looking into which coal power plants are performing less good, the oldest one, to decommission those. I know there's a lot of project and finance going into that, which is great, and which I think will be a good accelerator. Also, some of all this finance post-COVID being put into renewable energy, which I think gives a positive way forward. I really see this going in the right direction. But still, there is a lot of issues that have to be settled to enable all these things. One thing is a grid integration with a lot of various renewable energy. This has shown around the world that it is possible, and it is also possible in Indonesia. Now it's around 12% of the energy mix coming from renewable energy. Before you have to do much new things to the grid, before you have to go into battery storage, etc., there can still be a lot higher share of renewable energy in the system. And we have created models showing this, also working with DG Electricity in Indonesia on this. So many of these things are possible in the current system. And then, of course, there also has to be grid development going forward, more interconnectors, which is one of the cheapest ways of integrating a flexible energy system, has to be taken forward. So this is some of the most important points I see going forward for now. And I look forward to the discussion and some great insights from all of the other panelists.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Anders. Despite the some wind energy potential, I would like to ask specific on wind. What do you see the main barriers in Indonesia and in the region to scale up wind power deployment? We see this is a variable renewable energy, and I think all the latest number, the latest potential shows like more than 150 gigawatt, right? So what are the key barriers to rapidly deploy this? And you have touched a little bit in terms of maybe it takes some time to develop, but what do you see, if you can say, three main barriers that hamper rapid wind energy deployment in Indonesia and in the region?
I guess it's like one big thing is contractual terms. At least what I've seen in Indonesia. If you want to integrate something like wind, you also need a flexible energy supply in general. And right now the energy supply in Indonesia is not flexible, even with the coal and the gas, due to the contracts, take and pay contracts. So I think that's one barrier. Another barrier is also the belief in that wind energy can be integrated without battery storage as a backup, because as soon as you put a battery into the equation, it's become non-bankable, and I see this as a barrier as well. And we have made specific studies in Power Factory, like very specialized models in Indonesia, and seen that you can include wind energy even without battery backup or battery storage. So that's another one. And then also, of course, always the first projects are more expensive. You need some enablers. So look into regulation and I guess that counts all over Asia or Asean to look into the regulation and such to explore that and where you see the barriers there. That's going to be even more detailed. But I think that's the three biggest parts.
Yeah, thank you, Anders. Now I'm going to move to Florian. Florian, we have heard that to rapidly deploy renewable to replace fossil fuel, to replace coal in many countries in the region, including in Indonesia, and in particular in Indonesia, you need to have a scale-up investment. And question is to you, what is the instrument that available to scale up this rapid deployment rapidly solar, wind, and ocean? And I think the question also to how do you see the barriers on mobilizing and scaling up the investment in those renewable energy technologies?
Thank you so much, Fabi, for the two questions. Let me first again introduce myself. My name is Florian Kitt. I'm Senior Energy Specialist at the ADB in Indonesia and currently fully focused on Indonesia. The Asian Development Bank is an international financial institution that covers the Asia region, as the name says. So all of the 10 ASEAN member states are also members of the ADB. And we're currently having financing programs. If I go from the back, Vietnam, Indonesia, Cambodia, Laos, while some of the other member states are contributing states to the ADB. We've cooperated a lot with the Greater Mekong sub-region, but also with ASEAN, and currently also discussing how ADB's knowledge from the Greater Mekong sub-region, but also in the individual countries could provide further inputs to ASEAN Secretariat and ACE to fulfill the ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation Phase 2, APAI 2. So very grateful for the great introduction from ACE on the regional initiative. I think in terms of scaling up renewable energy and phasing down coal, what are the instruments available? That's a very good question. That is what we're currently in the process of figuring out. First of all, I think we need financial instruments, and the ADB is just one among many partners that is currently looking into this agenda. You mentioned before, Fabi, the great partnership that Indonesia, under its G20 presidency currently, initiated with the G7 presidency of Germany. And from what I've seen, at least in the news, there were some important, at least discussions going on at the last G7 energy minister meeting in Berlin. And obviously from ADB, an international organization, which is owned and steered by its member states. We're looking forward to the high-level political outcomes of these important political discussions towards the G7 summit end of June and the G20 summit in Indonesia in Bali on November 22nd. From ADB side, what we can bring to A, phasing out coal, and B, scaling up renewables is concessional financing for our member states, as well as private sector financing from our private sector arm for companies. So we can really provide financing to both sides of the equation, to governments to enhance the transition to a phase out coal, increase renewables, but also to support private sector players to take up more risk, for example, in some of the countries where contracting details might be a bit more risky than in more developed markets. Just to give you a bit of scale, the ADB has financed in the Southeast Asia region between 15 and 18, about $5 billion per year in the region. We upped that to about 7 billion in 2018, 19, and during the pandemic, we increased further to also assist our member states with this unprecedented crisis with about $11.5 billion. Energy obviously is a big part of that, but not everything. In Indonesia, over the last years, I would say on average, we've done about $1 billion in energy financing. We've recently closed the solar PV loan in Laos for the cheapest solar PV project in terms of pricing per kilowatt hour for, I believe, 18 million back then. So that's obviously a smaller project. Financing size depends on the country. And we're very keen to also bring more to cross-regional projects and to support the APG, the ASEAN Power Grid, as well as regional initiatives. Now, importantly, Fabi, you've asked me what are the barriers to scaling up. Now, it's a big question, especially if we're looking at 10 countries. I would say the first one is obviously the availability of cheap financing. There's no shortage of financing around. The question is, how cheap can we get, especially when we're talking about coal-fired power plants? The equation is that, at least from our calculations, that to reduce the lifetime of coal in the region, we need to go down to at least 3% financing. I would say on average, most coal-fired plants were probably financed at around 8 to 11% of financing. That could already reduce costs. But there are not many, apart from the big bilaterals in the G7, I think some of the international financial institutions, that can bring really 3% financing. So that is where we need a global coalition. So financing would be my first barrier, and that's something that the international community, at least from my view, is working on very keen and strong to overcome, also under the auspices of COP26 and then the forthcoming COP27 in Egypt. Second would be, I think, a lack of integration in the region. I think our first speaker alluded to this. More interconnections regionally would really help to be able to plan regionally to bring cheapest supply to demand centers. I mean, the Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore transmission and hydro provision project is, I think, a first in its kind. If that could be followed up with more interconnections, as well as joint planning, for example, joint regional planning on renewables to bring larger scale renewables and decrease cost and financing, that would help a lot. I don't want to fully go down to the country level because it's really very different between Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, Laos for that side, what then needs to be done. But I think a standardization of, let's say, contractual agreements and how contracts are done could help a lot also for investors to come more strongly to the region and offer similar terms. That could really help as well. Finally, I would add, because you mentioned coal in the beginning, obviously we're dealing with legacy issues, right? We do have established power systems that we need to transition. So I think in there, it's one, we need to think about what do we do with the existing fossil supplies. That goes to the coal phase out. Second, and I think Lisa very ably mentioned that we also need to think about the social and environmental and economical impacts of doing so. And there we really need to ensure and help this work together with these countries to mitigate the impact, for, let's say, for example, coal miners in Kalimantan. Those families depend on that. We need to think about the environmental impacts of batteries. If they enlarge, what do we do with them after their lifetime? And we need to think about energy security, so stable supplies, because we can't afford, let's say, going back to Indonesia, another power outage, as power outages cost industry millions of dollars, and then in return also jobs that are very much needed after this pandemic. Let me stop here. I hope I didn't talk to them, and be happy to answer another question.
Thank you, Florian. This is very comprehensive answers you have. Now I would like to go to Nguyen. Nguyen, we have heard about the remarkable progress of renewable energy deployment in Vietnam, and it's set kind of example to many Southeast Asian nations, and also the world, I think. But that's very interesting because you not only have solar and wind that's increased significant number in the last 4-5 years, but also some research shows that Vietnam has a great potential for tidal energy. I think that's along the Hai Phong, Quang Ninh coastal area, and also southeast region, with a perspective of 41.6 gigawatt hour per kilometer square per year. Wow, that's a lot, I think. And how do you see the role of this type of renewable resources in Vietnam energy transition effort? You also have some significant number of coal plants like we have. So what do you see the role of tidal energy in accelerating Vietnam energy transition?
Yeah, thank you very much, Fabi. So I think the ocean energy development is the right direction for Vietnam to achieve the sustainable energy transition. And the trend of the transition from oil and gas exploitation to ocean energy has taken in many countries around the world. For example, a lot of the companies the transition of the business from the oil and gas to the offshore wind energy. And nowadays we also can see that several research saying many countries also have a tidal potential, especially for Vietnam. We have a quite strong potential on that. So from my point of view, I think this also a very good resource that we should explore and have a further research in that area, especially in Hai Phong and Quang Ninh, the area that you said the tidal potential is quite rich. But we also need to considering the, for example, like some issue, for example, like a protected area, because that area is also have many place that we call is heritage area, and yeah, so it's also a benefit for the country by doing some business over there. We have Hạ Long Bay, which is like located in Quảng Ninh, and it's also seeing that for that area, then we have to it's type like multi-purpose benefits for the country. So we need to have a better spatial master plan to have better use of the ocean. Yeah. So for example, like in our group, then we have been doing quite a lot of the study on the ocean economic, and we found that beside the tidal, then we also have offshore wind energy, and so we did quite a lot of study on the grid integration, supply chain, and social environment or energy port in Vietnam. And we think those studies will be support for Vietnam and for the policymaker in Vietnam to have a better decision on how we can have a better transition of the energy in sustainable and reliable way. Yeah, so I just only can say something about tidal because it's still very new in Vietnam as well.
Yeah. Nguyen, if you can tell us what are the envisioned strategies and policy framework that your government is preparing to make to optimize the utilization of this potential ocean energy in Vietnam. That's something that maybe we can learn, as we also in many Southeast Asia nations, the ocean tidal energy is very, very still niche and even not really into the plan.
Yeah, I could share with you on slide, which is like shows how how the government is planning to go further on the ocean energy. For example, like the government is planning to have a marine spatial master plan. This master plan is going to be like considering all the benefits that the ocean can bring to the country, especially when we think about the energy. Then it could be like which are the area we can develop the offshore wind energy, and which are the areas that can develop for the tidal energy. There's a study from the decision from the government side. It's about the energy port system, which is very important because normally for the energy port, the location of the energy port could be very linked to the area that we develop the energy source, and it's normally it's going to be in the coastal area. So that master plan is also very important. And then we also can see that the government have quite a lot of the new mechanism. For example, like in Vietnam, in the part because the power market is monopoly by the government, but now it's changing and it's going to be like become the competitive power market. Under that, then we also have quite a lot of the we expect to have quite a lot of new regulation. For example, like sea survey leasing regulation, so that investor can land the ocean area to develop the offshore wind or tidal energy project. We also can see that the optioning scheme is for renewable energy is coming up, and so we can have a better choice of the which renewable energy source could be developed in Vietnam, in which time and how. We also can see the DPPA pilot is on the way, and the government think DPPA will kind of like contribute to support for the investor to have better deal with the user. So we have more people in the power market, more seller, and that would be the best to support for the competitive power market in Vietnam. We also can see that some will have a new regulation related to the grid investment in Vietnam, especially for the transmission system, because the government is recently in March, the government would propose to the National Assembly to revise the law, the electricity law, and especially there's one article said that the private investor have right to invest in the construction of the transmission, operation, and maintenance the transmission now. So I think there are several new regulations from the government side that support for the future renewable energy development in Vietnam. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Nian. This is my last question to all to the panelists, because we have come to the end of our discussion. It's very interesting. The experience also for Vietnam, but you see that currently Europe face energy crisis, right? And what there's a kind of response, in particular accelerating energy transition through this Renewable Power EU initiative that just has, launched a couple of weeks ago, right? So my question to Lisa and Anders in this case, What is the relevance, do you see, and the impact of this crisis to the energy transition? And what do you see whether this initiative, Renewable Power EU, could have a spill over effect to the Southeast Asia region, also in our endeavor to the energy transition? Maybe Lisa first and then Anders.
Thank you, Fabi. Yeah, I mean, we don't have much time. I could go into much detail, but I think in a nutshell, I think we see quite a substantive change of how Europe thought the energy system would play out. And now there's quite a shock to the system because there was a high dependence on one supplying country for oil and particular gas, and Germany is particularly suffering from that. And I think there's a massive impact in Germany. So we see on top of the inflation, I think, which is a global phenomenon, we have massive increases of energy prices. So people really feel the pain. So energy poverty suddenly becomes a topic. Industrial competitiveness becomes a topic. So there's a massive impact. And what I see, what is encouraging out of this, and also the initiative you just mentioned, is that Germany's reaction is a very clear commitment to renewable energy. So to say, like, okay, we have been over-dependent on one supplier, we're over-dependent on fossil fuels, and renewable energy are the answer. We're sticking to our targets, even though we have, there's significant challenges also in terms of affordability, but in the long run, renewable energy is the solution, and it creates the independence that you need. It creates the jobs in the country, it supports industries, and the fuel is for free. You're not dependent on shocks. I think it also has a lot of relations to cooperation and who do we cooperate with. And I think there's also through the G7, through the G20, the alignment and strategic partnerships you're seeing evolving now also with Indonesia to really move towards a strong and resilient energy system. And I think these are also that certainly has an impact on ASEAN and Indonesia. Everyone is listening, everyone's looking, okay, what is happening there, how to avoid what is happening there to the Indonesian market. And I think there's also, again, the answer is renewables and how to be independent from imports, but also, I guess, exports of fossil fuels.
Thank you, Lisa.
Over to Anders.
Anders, your view on this?
I'll do it shortly. Yeah, if you compare Denmark to Germany, Germany is still much more reliant on, for example, Russian gas than Denmark is. So from Denmark changing maybe earlier to renewable energy, being more independent on our energy source, has done that we are not in as bad of a case today. Of course, everyone is experiencing the high oil crisis when driving the oil prices when driving their car, and we do also have a lot of gas appliances. But a lot of it has been going by renewable energy, and I think that's important to learn for the rest of the world, that independency which renewable energy gives is extremely important, and we make sure that you don't get hit by shocks in energy prices because you have a stable price going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Last, I would like to ask Sulfikar on your response.
Hinin tags and welcome this is Ash from Him. I take you go from I bought this mixer about a year and a half ago. But
this crisis that can be avoided maybe in the near future for Southeast Asia with all the energy cooperation.
Yeah, I think it is, first of all, I'd like to say again that it is very in line with what we hope in the regions, pursuing this energy security, accessibility, affordability, and sustainability for all. And learning from the lessons, not only in Europe, but also across the globe, I think it is very important to increase the energy dependency. And I think renewable energy can fit the story in here with its availability within the regions. So playing with the strengths, the unique strengths of each country would be one of the key. So it might seem like a pragmatic, but again, energy security seems to be the center stage these days. And I think pushing forward towards energy dependency, energy diversification is also important so that we do not depend on few resources or energy options. And of course, the cooperation within the region needs to be strengthened. I think one of our program area, the ASEAN Power Grid, is very crucial in these sectors. Having capability of transferring electricity with the hydropower rich resources in the CLM area. Indonesia might contribute as well in its solar, wind energy, ocean energy, the same with the other countries in between. That will be very crucial. And also, I think also crucial is on the cooperation in development of the policy and also technology. So a sharing of best practices, like we heard the experiences from the Vietnam, which will be very useful for other regions, other countries in the region. With the same also with the technology. I think probably in the 10, 20 years in the future, as we know, ASEAN will not want to be like only the market. We want to be the players. So I think having a cooperation in terms of supply chain, for example, within the region would be very important. Some country might develop the expertise in the development of battery. The other might have the expertise in the development of the solar panel, and the other might have the expertise in the oceans. And having these collaborations with each uniqueness pathways will be very crucial for the regions in ensuring its own energy security in the future.
Thank you, Mr. Sulfika. I would like to continue this discussion. I know there's still a couple of questions, and also there is some question from participant that I couldn't take because of this time limited. I would like just to end with this, that collaboration and cooperation is very important to strengthen our energy system and successfully to implement our energy transition plan in the country and also in the region. I think that's also the spirit of the G20, and I think we can use this opportunity again to strengthen our collaborations and partnerships to make energy transition successful in this region. I would like to thank to all panelists for your insightful comments and ideas, and also to all participants. With that, I would like to close the session. I would like ask you to give a big applause to all of the panelists virtually. And again, thank you very much, and hope to see you again in another opportunities. Back to the moderator.
Thank you once again, our panelists for today, Mr. Sulfikar, Ms. Nien, Ms. Tinshert, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Kit, and our moderator, Mr. Tumiwa. Thank you once again. Ladies and gentlemen, to close today's event, we'd like to invite Mr. Dr. Prahoro Nur Cahyo, co-chair of the Energy Transition Working Group, G20 Indonesia 2022. Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, Indonesia, to deliver the closing remarks.
All distinguished speakers and participants, greeting to you all. Good afternoon from Jakarta. As a co-chair of ETWG, I'm pleased to conclude this insightful webinar. In today's webinar, we have been digging the perspective from all speakers on upskilling renewable solutions in solar, wind, and ocean energy. These webinar sessions also even make the discussion more specific on how the renewable solutions could be expanded in the context of Southeast Asia and whole emerging economies and developing countries. Reflecting that key question, I made several concluding notes. First, Southeast Asia has become one of the most promising regions in renewables development, particularly on solar and wind. This progress has been made within the last 5 years. One leading example is Vietnam, which has doubled its renewable energy productions between 2016 and 2020, Solar energy development plays a key role in Vietnam securing a place in the top 10 global solar installed capacity. In 2021, Vietnam's combined solar and wind power capacities have reached around 20 gigawatt or around 210 watt per capita. Second, learning from the IRENA's global and regional outlooks, the speaker's perspective and Vietnam leading experiences, I must take several key necessities to expand renewable energy solutions. The first one, government's commitment to energy accessibility is the first necessary pillar to ensure sustainable economic performance as well as sustainable energy services. Second, from a public perspective, strong pressure on cross-cutting issues in sustainability, environment, and health have become second pillar, which have driven robust policy and political commitment of policymakers. The growing amount of public concerns on clean energy and clean air issues resonates directly with the stakeholders' solid motivation to develop clean energy. And the third one, financing is the holy grail to support renewable energy scale up, which become the third pillar. Industries which are developing and utilizing renewables must be rewarded by effective feed-in tariff and also a supportive investment and business environment. Fourth, on a global level, government's commitment to the international climate change commitments must be translated into strong political support, stable and predictable policies. In terms of financing, policy certainty will maintain project costs and support funding opportunity. In terms of technicalities, this could be focused on sustainable infrastructure, which is directed for enhancing transmission systems. This will be also improving system flexibility and preparing the use of innovative technologies. Moving forward, we are planning to amplify the recommendations, practices, and experiences in expanding renewables within the key deliverables of G20 ETWG at both the G20 ministerial level and leaders level. I sincerely hope that you will continue to follow the G20 ETWG virtual webinar series, because next week we will organize the next two webinars on clean and renewable energy, one of which will be co-organized with IRENA. Looking forward to see you all again in the next webinar.
Thank you, Dr. Brahoro, for the closing remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of our event today. Thank you very much for your participation in making this event a success. To all distinguished guests, on behalf of the committee, we thank all of you for your time to attend today's event. For your information, this event is screened live and recorded, and the video of this webinar is available on Kementerian ESDM YouTube channel. Once again, have a nice rest of the day. Thank you very much.